So I'm gonna make sure we kind of go through that. Real quick here in terms of the agenda, this is just, here's kind of the plan in terms of we go through, right? Just I would discuss a couple of ground rules. We're going to go through AIGNE, spend some time on best practices, and basically go into some like examples and walkthroughs, right? And one of the things that you'll see as we talk is the best practices we go through, you'll see in the examples, right? And I think, some of you have probably done some of these things, but it's more just making sure before we go to the next part, we really want to make sure everybody's really locked in with some of these like core ideas and core concepts, because that will allow us then to go to 103 and 201, right, in terms of what's next. And then I'm just a little bit of time at the end talking about MCP. So I think you guys have probably seen Robert posting about MCP. Anybody here heard of it, know about it, interacting with it, care about it? Okay, so just me. And that's cool. And MCP is just this really interesting thing that's kind of happening out in the industry right now, especially in the AI space, where lots of new opportunities are being created for platforms like Agent to really begin to scale out in a really meaningful way. And I think for most of us here, this is going to cover a lot of ideas that we've had that weren't available to us now all of a sudden become instantly accessible and available as we go through it. So ground rules, real quick. It's not mandatory to have built-in agent, but just my assumption being as we kind of talk through this, right, is everybody's like looked at it, maybe tried it, kicked the tires a little bit as we kind of go through it. So if not, that's okay. We'll go through the examples kind of step by step, and each example has a kind of a detailed walkthrough, right? So we can try that. I would also encourage you as we're talking to go in and actually try the examples yourselves while I'm talking about it. Don't hesitate to just get on and experiment, right? That's really kind of the idea. And then lastly, just ask questions. So as you go through, you can talk about your own use case. You can talk about what you're seeing on the screen, but again, it's this setup is meant to be more interactive for all of us. Cool. So for those of you who don't know, I've met a few of you. Some of you I haven't. So my name's Matt. Twitter, you can find me at Rob Roy Hobbs. Rob Roy Hobbs being part the movie The Natural with Roy Hobbs, the greatest baseball player that ever lived, who's of course fictional, and then Rob Roy, right, from one of our famous 19th century authors, right, the chivalrous knight, if you will, so to speak. So, but I consider myself a longtime ArcBlock employee. I was with the company back in 2017 to 2021, and then rejoined the company here again just a short time ago. So it's not a new thing for me, and a lot of my focus right now is just on working with the Decentralized Identity Foundation, working in the identity space, working with a ton of startups to help them build their products and build their programs out, and just generally wanting everybody to be awesome and have success as we go through this. So it's my quick intro on myself. As we kind of kick this off, I did want to cover this at the beginning because this is kind of a table setter for all of us. And as you think about agents, one really important concept is to understand like what is an agent. So when you think about like AIGNE, the platform, in terms of the things we build, it's important to understand in terms of this concept, right? There's really kind of two main approaches as you look at agents, AI agents, so to speak. One is around workflows. So you're going to hear a lot of those. That's probably more of like your Salesforce, Microsoft, Adobe, whoever, right? And it's really what workflows are really, and just kind of predefined sequences of tasks, right? That happen in a very kind of explicit way or a pre-programmed way, right? Where it's like, if this, then that, if this, then that. Right. So you design these workflows and AI can come in and step in and take over a lot of that and make it significantly more efficient. The other side of that is what we'll call more the agentic AI, right? And what in terms of the agentic AI, and I've written a few articles about it, right? But really what agents here in this case are kind of these autonomous entities, right? That have the ability to make decisions or even adapt based on the inputs that we're actually putting in there. And in this case, right, these are the ones that are really good at kind of open-ended problems, right? So they're able again to make choices, make a decision, create an output again based on a question I have, and the question could be like, "How are you?" Right? In a workflow, it wouldn't be able to answer that question, right? But within this kind of agent model, it can answer that question, right? Because in a workflow, it doesn't know what to do with open-ended question as you look at that. And I gave you an example there, right? In terms of like workflows like processing order, agents like a chatbot, right? So it can respond to that history as you look at that. So as you think about agent and why I mentioned this, right? Agent is really designed, it can do both, but it's really meant for number two, right? That's the way that we want agent to work is to enable people to easily solve kind of these agent problems, right? And in fact, try to do the majority of the work for you as you build an agent, right? A, partly no code, but then B is also just automating some of the setups and steps that go into creating an agent, right? And that could be as far as like, as you create a prompt, automatically generating inputs and outputs, right? So it's not something I have to go in and create. In fact, agent will more than likely take care of it. So any questions on that? Kind of makes sense. It's a little bit of a recap for many of you, right? In terms of agent, right? No code. It's really designed to be a no code platform. No code meaning, right, using visual interfaces, right, pre-built components, no programming. I think the last thing that, for example, I want to do is go in and actually have to put in code to do something. In fact, I just wanted to kind of work out of the box. And what's interesting about that is we kind of go through and I'll kind of explain the differences like a lang graph or link chain versus agent versus something else, right? Because many of the things that you typically will see on X or on Twitter require you to do more work. Like in this case, a lot of the work is already done for you. It does support all the top LLMs like Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. It's got that. Use cases are extensive, right? Again, token rewards, compliance, agents, etc. And most importantly for ArcBlock, right? It's all integrated. So you have the ability to leverage it kind of throughout the ecosystem. And in fact, I think what you'll find in the ArcBlock side is that agent will be baked in to just about everything over the next 3 to 6 months under the hood, right? So that there's, like, if you guys have gone on, if you're using Discuss Kit or you're using the community channel and you've seen, for example, the auto translate, that's all agent, right, happening behind the scenes in terms of what it's actually doing. So as we're working with these different features, different platforms or different products, right, agent will be part of that. So real quick, interestingly enough, I got a few questions around this, so I just wanted to pull up here real quick and just quickly talk about it. Again, I think everybody here has seen it. You know, agent management in terms of the UI, right? In terms of your builder, your processor, your output. In terms of doing that, the one thing that is less clear to people is the project settings. As you kind of go through this, and again, project settings, I mainly wanted to call out kind of three things. One is model, because I got like 4 questions about this. Model's going away. Number one. So when you look at this kind of right hand image over here, right, you see model as one of the tabs, like that's going to go away. Related to Git, Ross, you might be somebody who wants to actually leverage Git in terms of version control and whatnot. That's definitely there, but that's definitely more of a 301 level kind of opportunity for us. Like that's not something, for example, I'm using today, right? Because I'm not actually doing anything through GitHub as far as my build out. Void, you might be the same. That might be something for you, but if you're not a full stack developer, like I would encourage you to not go that direction. And that's really the recommendation too. Most of our own internal developers will say, "Hey Matt, that's not a good idea. So just don't bother." As you do that. And then integrations, right? And that's something, again, it's an advanced feature, but that's something that you're going to start to see more of. So I wanted to call this out because it's not something we typically talk about, but in terms of the settings, this will become more important as we go forward, especially as MCP and whatnot starts to come online. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Again, LLMs blocklets. I just want to remind everybody again, if you're not using agent, in fact, is cheaper to use than ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, you name it. And in fact, if you use the launcher to go and deploy it, I think it's like $15 for like an all-encompassing platter of LLMs, which is actually less than what you're going to go pay for like a ChatGPT. The one delta being is you're not going to get, for example, the ChatGPT's new 4.5 model that came out today, which is the $200 plan. Yeah, but I would encourage anybody, if you're not using agent through the launcher, even just as a chatbot, I would encourage you to do it just because you're going to save yourself about $5 to $10 a month in terms of your cost, in terms of doing that. The other part too, just to kind of reiterate, like in terms of these LLMs and blocklets, This is all the same stuff that ArcBlock uses, right? And 12, I know we've been talking about dog food. We dog food everything. Like what you guys see is like the exact same stuff that we use. And in fact, that when you go into agent, there's one of the AI agents is called a content improver. Um, Not the greatest like product marketing name, so to speak, but that's the same system we actually use internally to within Pages Kit, within Discuss Kit, to use AI to refresh our content, improve the content, etc. The other thing too, I would just call out, and Robert and I were having a good laugh about this yesterday, because like Tweet Assistant, Blog Writer, like we use all these things. Like Tweet Assistant is something on a regular basis I use, he uses. And the reason being is you can use it as a way to kind of have a check and balance, like, hey, I want to make sure I don't say something I'm not supposed to say, or I don't want to like have a cuss word or whatever it may be, right? You can create these rules around like, hey, this is what I wanted to do. So super helpful as you kind of go through that. And again, I know most of you guys know this, but just want to reiterate, some of those features and functionality. The other topic that has come up quite a bit recently is related to knowledge and memory, and we'll talk a little bit about it here and a little bit later as we go through. But definitely, this is something where Agent has a lot of capabilities beyond just a chatbot, right? In terms of using knowledge and memory, and so knowledge really. The intent behind that is for to apply a level of personalization, adaptability, efficiency. Where you're going to see examples of this would be like business terms, rules, contracts, web content, things where I kind of have like a predefined bucket of information that I want the system to use. And I was going to show you one really good example of this. There's a blocklet, if you haven't tried it. It's called the DIF Knowledge Base, and DIF Knowledge Base was designed for the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And so when you go and you actually interact with this chatbot, what we actually did is we took a bunch of content from the DIF and created a knowledge pool. So in this case here, if you go into knowledge, right, and we're looking at this agent, if you click it through, what you'll see here is there's a text file, and within the text file, there's a bunch of information, whenever it comes here, related to the DIF, right, in terms of core concepts, terminology, what is the foundation, et cetera. And so in designing the chatbot, you can actually see here, we basically said, hey, we want you to go and query the knowledge, basically the knowledge bucket that we've set up for DIF, your professional retrieval, you answer the questions, and you only answer the questions based on what's actually in that knowledge pool, nothing else, right? Now, there's a few things kind of missing from this for the purposes, but I wanted to show this because this is a great example of like where I would actually use it, where I have a very specific set of content that we want our chatbot to go and consume. And in this case, right, again, DIF, but it could be a menu, it could be a contract, it could be all sorts of stuff in terms of that. But this is a really, I think, kind of a good demonstration of like where and how I use knowledge in terms of doing that. And we'll kind of go, again, we'll go a little further into that, and then also in memory. And then memory is something where, some of you, I think some of you have seen Robert, he designed the virtual girlfriend chatbot. And with that, we had chat history included with that. And chat history really is designed to say, hey, remember the previous 50 chats, right? So that when I come and talk with you, it sounds like you actually remember what it is that we're talking about, right? I mean, yeah, it's all virtual, right? And you can put some rules around. Memory, on the other hand, is meant to be more like long-term, right? And these are things that we want you to remember a year from now, 2 years from now. An example I put in here would be like a customer service agent. I want you to remember the previous queries from this user to tailor the responses, right? So that I recognize, oh, hey, like 12 came on and we had a conversation about his investment account back in 2023 as an example, right? And so using memory is something that we can use to go and basically pull back that interaction, review it, and then be aware of it in this next conversation, right? So if you come back in 2025 and you say, hey, remember back in 2023, we talked about this, that would be, again, that's a great use of memory. And I think from the ArcBlock perspective, that's definitely more 300 level, 400 level type applications, right? So if you're thinking about memory, you're thinking about using that type of scenario, right? Like, let's definitely sit down and kind of map out how you think you might want to use it, and we can help with that. Any questions on that for you guys?
Yeah, Matt, I got a question, not related. You mentioned earlier about the models being removed in the future. I was wondering why that's the case, because I found that feature quite useful to be able to pick a model, let's say GPT-4 or anything specific.
I think they're baking it in more into the UI itself. So you'll have more control within kind of the actual UI windows. So it's a bit repetitive. But
So what's the default model for the features you load?
you mean in terms of the UI? So like here, let me pull up here.
In terms of like the large language model used, because if you remove the feature allowing the user to pick for agent which model to use, what's going to be the default?
Sure. Christopher, let me verify like how they actually do that. I actually don't know off the top of my head
No,
what the replacement would be. It's a great question. The other part, we're actually going to come back to the LLMs here in a few minutes as we can walk through this, but I'll kind of describe like some of the different use cases, right? And then based on that, we can let's review that and make sure you got what you need. So
sounds good.
Cool. Got it. Okay, let's keep going. Back to where we were. Some knowledge and memory. Any Ross, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I love it. I love the memory aspect of it, right? Because I'm actually creating an agent now where, yes, it needs to be contained context, right? And you know, we don't want users asking, you know, hey, write me a birthday song. You know, if it's financial clients that we're supporting. So very cool.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So let's bring up a good question. If you did want like contained information or like kind of rails around what types of questions you can answer, is that possible?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Are you like, what do you have a little more explanation behind that, or is it just general?
Just I've used a few other like agent frameworks, and what'll happen a lot of the times is you can, if you have like a domain specific agent, you can go sing happy birthday to me and it'll do that. And I'm just wondering if you can stop that from happening. Answer a question that I want you to answer, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, here the diff example I was actually just talking about a minute ago. For example, this one, it won't answer any other questions. And in fact, this is just a simple prompt in terms of the command, right? Being able to go and say, hey, just don't answer any questions that aren't related to the prompt. Now, the one thing that's not in here, not to kind of go on tangent, like I don't have any error handling or anything else related to this. Like this example is purely just meant to show how to use knowledge to basically run like a knowledge base with a very very defined knowledge base component, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it. So if you go in and you actually try this, right, it'll just like, nothing's going to happen. Nothing will happen, right? Because it doesn't actually know what to do because we didn't tell it to do anything. But you can see within the rules, right, we're actually clearly defining, right? Don't explain, and you can only answer questions related to the knowledge base. Anything else, nothing's going to happen. Now, one other really important part of that, and we're going to talk about this also in a minute, is creating kind of checks and balances within the system. And so a lot of what I'm going to focus on today too is also talk about multi-agent configurations. And for lack of a better way of saying it, I kind of refer to it as the editor versus the writer, right? And having an overseer, right, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it. And that's something that internally I spent a lot of time learning how to do in a more meaningful way, because what you find out is there's a lot of there's a lot of ambiguity at times because we don't all communicate the same way, but then B is like within our system, if the AI doesn't know what to do, right, it may fudge its way through it, or it may in fact lie, right, and try to find a way around it. So let me come back to that, and as we kind of talk through, you guys let me know if that answers the question, or if it doesn't, we can of course come back to it.
But yes, and I do love the memory aspect. Again, a customer, because right as of yesterday now, so now I'm storing questions that are presented by the user, and so I want the agent to go in there, okay, review this specific user's questions, right? Previous questions, look at your previous answers and then, coincide it, right? Provide that context for this new question.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool.
And yeah, definitely all very doable. And I think depending on how you approach a ride, like there's what we're looking at here is kind of I'll kind of define it as kind of the more basic version. But then again, if you go into the more advanced versions, you have a lot more control, also to define the parameters, within your agent, right? But I think the goal of agent all along was to be able to say, hey, can I in fact do this through a simple prompt, and give it directions, and again, have it be smart enough to know that. But in doing so, I got to have a few ways to verify that the work is actually being done the way that it's supposed to. And in fact, that's something that ArcBlock internally, right? We have a lot of multi-agent configurations, running with our AI. So, cool. Let me keep bouncing, through this, and I think we'll actually come back to some of these topics. And in fact, the modular agent design is topic number one, right? So this is really kind of getting into the heart of, best practices, right? And as you're building no code agents specifically with an agent, there's some things we want everyone to kind of focus in on, right? Because, again, I'm not an AI expert, but I'm learning how to build AI agents, but in do so in a very kind of meaningful way. One of the core components that would be is like modular agent design, right? The purpose behind that is to say, and feel free to disagree, right? Is each agent has responsibility, right? Each agent has one purpose. Rather than kind of like mixing and matching my topics, I say, hey, agent number one, you're a writer. Agent number two, you're the editor of the writer, so to speak. And in doing so, right, we have really clear defined roles in terms of like what their purpose is, right? And it can be basic, it could be complicated. But it creates kind of that, again, those mechanisms to make sure each agent's actually doing what's supposed to, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? In terms of that. And a good example of that would be as we go through, is like, I'm collecting information, I'm doing data collection. And as I do data collection, that's agent number one. Agent number two then says, okay, take that data and give me a sentiment analysis on all that data you're collecting, right? Two separate tasks, right? And then, in fact, we may have a third that's kind of the overseer to say, hey, make sure you guys are doing the things you're supposed to do. And you can see in the examples we walk through today, each of these will be a multi-agent configuration in terms of how we process the information that's coming into the agent itself. It's pretty straightforward. Any questions? Make sense? Okay, cool. Second part, prompt engineering. Being that agent primarily is a no code AI platform, prompt engineering is critical to be able to have success, using agent. And what I mean by that is, I think I mentioned earlier, for example, is like we don't all communicate the same way, nor do the agents, right? And agents, some may make more assumptions about what we put in there. Some will not, like they're not smart enough. So as you create your prompts, right, again, kind of the best practice, right, is, clarify and be specific, right? Be really clear about what you want your agent to do. As you do that, part two of that is really actually breaking down the tasks. And for me, as an example, I'm a bit of a non-linear thinker at times. So creating smaller tasks from bigger tasks can be a little bit challenging, right? But it's really kind of thinking through my logical steps of like, okay, great. Like first is I want you to intake the data. Part two is I want you then to clean the data. Part three is then I want you to review the data, right? Part four is now I want you to put the data in this format, right? Whatever it may be, right? But kind of breaking it on the tasks. And you can see in the example here, again, it's like, hey, like you're a meeting summarizer, right? First is create a concise summary of the meeting, highlighting discussions. Part two is extract all the action items, based on and identify who's responsible. So we're kind of very clearly laying it out, right? And that's important to kind of break down those tasks. Part three of that, right, is the output, the formatting. So as you think about in terms of how you tell the agent to do the things that they're supposed to do. When I restarted with ArcBlock a few months ago, I think mine were basically like giant paragraphs, right? Where I'd be like, hey, agent, go and do this. And then when you're all done, do these 4 things. I really didn't break it down. And oftentimes what you'd find is things would get missed or it didn't come out the way that I wanted it to. And so output formatting is core to that, right? And you have again, just kind of example here where it's like, in terms of like taking those action items, break them down, assign it by person, task, and deadline if mentioned, right? So it's very specific in terms of that output. And as you do that, again, the agent will be able to perform much better for you within your prompt. And then the fourth bullet here, I would just call it here, is in terms of handling edge use cases or edge cases, right? Where specify what happens when something is missing. And we'll actually go through an example of that, because there's one of the examples we're going to cover later is building an agent that can create learning plans for people. And I designed it in such a way where it's all text input from a person. So I will come in and say like, hey, I'm Matt. I want to learn about coding, and why not? So the agent needs to be told like, hey, okay, if something's missing or one of the core requirements that we gave to you is missing, what do you do? Right? Otherwise, it may not do anything. Or again, it could make an assumption and do something else. So it's really important in terms of doing that. So any questions on that? You guys good? I assume it's pretty straightforward. Okay.
Not really a question, Matt, but horse on observation. The way you do it, right? Like you said, we all communicate differently. So I suppose there's different ways to do it as well. Because, for example, the agents I made, I write down 2 hashes, then rules, and then I highlight the rules to the agent. And maybe I give like a short summary of what they should do. Is that okay as well, you reckon? Or would you recommend the 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of linear thinking, like you said?
This is meant as a best practice. Actually, it's funny you say that, because I have a slide coming up here. Prompt engineering, find your own plan, right? Like, we don't all communicate in the same way. And that's one of the unique, I think, elements of agent, and really, I've just, again, no code AI or like chatbots, right? Is like, we all communicate differently, right? My goal here was to kind of say like, hey, like generally, right, this is how you would want to approach it. And I think for you is to say, hey, like, as long as I've got my, like, you can see the example here in terms of like, I've got a goal, my return format, my warnings, and then other context, right? Like, you can do it however you want, right? As long as it's kind of broken up, in a way. This link here also goes to like Anthropic's, basically how to prompt engineer, right? And if you go on X, and I did this yesterday where I went on X, I was like, there's literally like 100 ideas, like, have the perfect prompt and you should follow me exactly, right? And you're like, okay, like, your prompt sucks, right? Let's move on and do something else as you go. So it's a great question. And for sure, like, just be mindful of like the best practice, right? Because that's the goal with the best practice, is how to like achieve the best result. But then how we actually do it, I think is really determined by us as a communicator, right? Because I can guarantee you, as an example, like, Robert and I do not communicate the same way. And in fact, never mind. Yeah, I'm learning, right? My background, in fact, is I'm a liberal arts major, way back in the day, right? Robert obviously is a software engineer, right? So imagine liberal arts and software engineers, and maybe 12, like you and Void, it's kind of the same, where you kind of we come out from different pathways, right? And we don't necessarily communicate exactly the same way, but the goal is the same, right? At the end, in terms of doing that. So, real quick, let me just kind of jump back through this, because I did want to just highlight a couple things, right? In terms of like the prompt engineering, right? And
will the slides be made available after meeting? Because I would be interested to go to the links and stuff.
Let me just share with everybody right now.
Oh, thank you.
I think you guys know ArcBlock, but everything's an open book from our perspective. So there's nothing here that is proprietary. Some of the links that I have in here, I'm going to change after the meeting, because they go to some specific examples in my account, but we'll get that. Real quick, just in terms of tying up prompt engineering, if anything comes from today's workshop, like, that's a focus area, right? Is really learning how to prompt. And I don't mean as a consumer, it's more of thinking like, hey, as an engineer, or as, again, a product builder, being mindful of the things I'm putting into my agent, right? To make sure that I'm in fact getting the outputs that my consumers or my users actually want in terms of doing that. And a great example of that is, if you look at ArcBlock, for example, we have a new team bot that we created. So we're actually testing like an AI for our internal systems, that you can go and query and ask it questions about like documents, things I worked on, OKRs, whatever they may be, right? And what I quickly found was like the outputs were great for the engineering team, but as a non-engineering person, I really struggled. I don't understand what I'm seeing. It doesn't make sense to me. And so, it's kind of finding that balance as you do that. But within the user input management, right, kind of validating inputs to make sure there's no errors, right? Ensure text inputs are properly formatted. And in fact, with AIGNE, user input validation features, right, to streamline the data. And so as you kind of just think about these things, like just be really mindful, like as you type, because I think speaking for myself, like when I interact with the chatbots or like ChatGPT or otherwise, like I have typos and other things all the time, and I don't fix them because I'm like, whatever, it should know. But in the case of like as I'm designing my product or I'm designing an agent for consumption, right, I want to be really mindful of doing that. The other part of that too, and we'll come back to it, is like keep in mind, like the more content you have in these, the more words, etc., the more expensive it is to process it as you kind of go through it. So if you can be concise and you can be clean, you're going to consume less credits as you do that. So part two is like testing, iterating. So I think I would guess most people on this call have tried the debug feature within AIGNE, but definitely get in there and make sure you test it thoroughly, right? And in fact, the other day I tried every different output feature of AIGNE to test to see like, okay, what actually comes out, right? Does this actually improve it? Does it change it? If I use, I'll show you an example here. Because the default typically is generate text stream, and then within the outputs, and in my case, I'm like, well, hey, what happens if I take that away and I make it a very specific output versus generate text stream to see what happens, right? And in some cases it worked, in some cases it actually stopped working, right? So I had to figure out what's actually happening, right, with that. So just be mindful of that as you kind of go through that. Again, error handling, big part of that, right, is making sure you tell your agents what to do when something isn't working as you kind of go through that, right? So typically it's going to be like, hey, if like your agent can't process requests, either A, inform the user something's missing, or B, can I actually escalate it to another agent in my configuration to handle said error, right? Because again, my agent has a very specific purpose. Its purpose is not error handling. In fact, its purpose is to process something. But I have another agent over here that's great at handling errors and problems, right? As you do that. And so just kind of be mindful of that, like as you again, you think about your prompts and configurations. And we talked about this already, so I won't go over this one, right? But in terms of the prompt engineering, right? Find your plan, right? Find what works for you. But just keep the best practices in mind, right? As you build these things. I definitely would encourage everybody, like if you haven't, like you take a look at Anthropic's article. It's a good article. It's a little detailed for me, but it's great to kind of learn from people who are building the systems because they fundamentally understand how the AI is supposed to respond to the inputs with that. And so again, we can all walk away as prompt experts at the end of the day. So questions on that? Everybody's good? Well, I see you jumped on. Welcome, buddy. Good to see you. All right. So here's a pretty cool prompting concept. Some of you may have heard this, some of you may have not. Anybody heard of chain of density prompting? No? So this is something where, and I'm going to go through an example, is in a situation where I'm using like a editor writer configuration. So actually the best example I can give you guys is like recently ArcBlock launched the translation service within our Discuss kit, right? So our community sites all have built-in translation. And the first iterations of that, like we've got multiple agents that are checking the work, right? One's doing the translation, another one's coming and checking the work and doing translation. And there's a few steps going along the way. There's this concept called chain of density prompting, right? Chain of density really is designed to tell the agent, rather than using multiple agents, you say, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to go through your response like 5 times. And each time you go through it, either want you to add to it or to take away, but keep the core concepts in mind as you do that. And the reason being is, as you do that is, and if you have the deck, you can actually sample prompt in here, and I'll show you real quick what actually happens with this one. So this chain of density, and this is something we're using a lot within the ArcBlock side to make our responses more thorough, cleaner, and better for an end user. And really, like one of the outcomes that is super interesting from this is that it actually makes it more human-like as you respond. which is a kind of an odd way of saying it. So here you can just see, again, I've got no additional prompting, right? I've just got my chatbot. I'm going to put it in debug mode so you can actually see it. So I've got a built-in prompt. If you're looking at the deck, it's actually down in the notes. Let me see here. I'll pull it up here real quick so you guys can actually see it. So in terms of this prompt, right? Hey, you're going to generate an increasingly concise, entity-dense summary of an article, right? Repeat the following steps 5 times, right? And then it kind of goes through this like sequence of activities, right? As you do that. And again, I think this is something where we don't need to go into a ton of detail today, but as you go forward, like this is definitely something to investigate from your perspective. And so what you can actually see here within the debug mode. So first it takes like this, it's got this content. Now as I'm coming through the prompt, you can see, okay, create summary iteration number 1, summary iteration number 2, summary iteration number 3. And what you can see with each one, if you actually if you can see my screen here, each one's actually getting a little bit shorter, right? It's actually changing. Each version is not the same, but at the core, it's the same content. You know, by the time I get to number 5, right, which is probably the shortest version, right, and the most dense in terms of the content as you do that. And so this is something I think, again, as you think about prompting, I would encourage you guys to investigate and to learn more about, to see how chain density prompting might actually work, especially if you're like in a case where you're generating content or an output for someone where, again, you want to give them some type of response or some types of summary. Like Crypto, for example, like if you're doing like a healthcare response, right, and being able to use this kind of like multiple iteration summary to get to summary number 5, right, which is the most concise, the most dense, the best information possible. And you can see here again, it kind of shows another example here on the screen of the 5 iterations that it kind of goes through and what changed with each one. So within this, there's a couple of reference articles to take a look at. So that's your, I can call it the Call of Duty prompt. Serving
That's how long. COD.
Yeah, if anybody's into COD, this is your prompt. Cool. Okay. So entry agent as a user interface. So kind of going back again to like taking that core concept first again of like, I have agents with specific purposes. And Crypto, I think you asked a question about this as well early on in the ticket, right? But using entry agent as a user interface, right? It's kind of your input and your output, right? It's your front facing gateway to the end user, right? And really serves as a primary point of like handling both the inputs and the outputs, right? It's kind of the rule maker, right? If you will, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the concept behind that, again, is just one of the examples being is like just a very simplified user experience, right? Like I don't have to go and interact with like 10 agents. In fact, I only have to interact with 1. But behind the scenes, right, there's a team of an army of agents, right, that are doing all sorts of cool things. And it's the one that makes sure, right, that the things are actually happening that need to happen. And so the example being is, again, you can see here, I've got this like 3 agent configuration. I go in here, I set it as this entry agent, but from an end user standpoint, right, they only see the UI itself, right, where I actually go and put, you know, whatever the inquiry is that I have on that. So I like Void, have you guys tried that? Are you guys using that in some of the stuff that you're working on? I know Crypto, or you are.
Nope, not yet.
It's like, Matt, stop calling on me.
No.
That's funny, buddy. Okay. So entry agent as a user interface, agent communication. Again, as you think about kind of these multi-agent configurations, entry agent is your conductor, right? Passing variables, define inputs, outputs, and kind of go through an example. For me, like one of the, and you guys can laugh at me, right? Like, again, for me, like this is a little bit of a challenge, right? Where I say, okay, hey, like in terms of that variable passing, how do I make sure information is getting passed from one agent to the next agent to the next agent, right? In terms of like how it actually works. And this is something where it's like, if as you design your AI agent or your app, and feel free to even jump in here, like just having a basic workflow in mind. And I know I said earlier about like workflow versus agents, right? But what this is more about is just understanding how the information needs to flow within your agents, right? So if you have one agent you're working with, it doesn't matter, right? If I have a bunch of agents that I'm working with, you just have to be mindful of like how that information is getting passed from one to the other, so that as you move from agent 1 to agent 2 is actually getting the correct information for it to do its job within that. And so I just got to point that out, right? I'm not gonna belabor this point, but important just to understand in terms of how that agent communication actually works, right? Input, output, so to speak. Okay. And now on to a different topic, LLM cost controls. So LLM cost controls, I was reading an article yesterday about I forget, it's one of the Doge people, and she was talking about, oh, I'm running this query, and it actually cost me $4,000 in LLM costs to run this query. Like, that's crazy, right? So it's good to think about. The one thing that quickly happens, right? And I think today things are getting cheaper. But LLM cost controls, especially as you start to consume, through API, for example, these things can really ramp up quickly, right? So just coming back again to LLM cost controls, this was a question that came up by multiple people before the workshop, right? Is to say, be concise, right? Eliminate unnecessary words, right? The more words you have, the more it costs as you do that. Model selection is really important as you think about LLM, right? So as you go through agent, for example, you've got access to all sorts of different models, recommending like, hey, look for specialized models, right? That focus on like specific tasks. Often are cheaper, they're often cheaper than like larger generalized models, right? That kind of a bigger purpose. The other thing you can also do within agents, you do have access to OpenRouter. So OpenRouter's LLM, they have a whole suite of LLMs you can get into with between like Llama, ChatGPT, Pi, there's a bunch. They also have this really interesting called OpenRouter. Auto LLM. And Auto LLM, what that's designed to do is to basically auto select the LLM based on the type of query that actually comes in. So as you're thinking about the complexity of the response, like, do I want to use the most expensive ChatGPT model when somebody's like, oh, hey Matt, how are you? How's it going today? Like, super simple. Like any LLM can handle that. Versus coming in and saying, hey, I want to design a complex mobile app and I want you to write the code, et cetera, et cetera. So what the auto LLM actually does is auto select the appropriate LLM based on the type of query, right? So that you can make sure that at least from an efficiency standpoint, when you're getting these more basic requests, it's using the very low cost, even free models to respond versus something that's going to be more expensive. So that's something you can do. The other two things I would mention here too, and if you've used Agent, down on the processing section, there's a section called caching, which caching is great if you have like frequent or like identical queries coming in. You can have Agent actually cache the responses, or have it basically cache the processing, right, that's actually happening. So it doesn't keep hitting your LLM over and over and over, right? It basically runs it once and then it caches it so that as that same query keeps coming in, it can actually handle it on a repeated basis without adding cost. So that's something, if you're interested, let me know. We can dive into that. But I know that for builders, it's a little more of an advanced concept. But definitely very useful, right? And then just in terms of data management, right? Again, just managing the amount of data that the LM reviews is super important as you kind of go through this. Pretty straightforward. Cool. So this is actually my favorite slide in the whole deck, just for you guys, just so everybody knows. So LLM responses, validate your LLM responses. More and more, if you've done any kind of research on LLMs, like one of the things you'll find is LLMs can actually be deceptive, and may not always say what's correct. And there's a link here to a academic article, right, in terms of like deceptive AI and the fact that they can do this. For me, it was a really funny interaction. So I was talking to, he's the founder of OpenSea, and now the CEO of OpenRouter, and he and I were having this kind of just conversation in via chat. And as you can see here, one of the things is, hey Matt, just asking the model which model is not always a good way of figuring it out. Models can lie. You should look at the model string instead. I was like, wait, what are you talking about, right? And specifically what he's referring to is like when you say like, check the work. I'll kind of show you this. So what he's actually referring to is down here within the JSON file. So when you look at like the debug mode, you get you have the option to kind of see like the prompt, and you have the analysis that's done. And then in here, you actually have this. So you can actually go in and see what's actually happening behind the scenes. So let's try this real quick,
That's
just as an
very cool.
example. Give me one sec here. Hello. So you can see within here, right? You've got all the kind of the process information. You've got the chat GPT. So this is actually telling you which model it's actually using. So this is what's actually happening behind the scenes, right? Versus what it actually tells you as you do that. And so it's good to have validation of that. And so why I'm talking about that again is the fact that as you look at LLMs, one is like if you're providing information back to a customer, or you have a user where like I'm making recommendations, whatever it may be, based on what the LLM responds, like make sure we're checking our work, right? And that's where, again, something like a multi-agent configuration comes in, is you can have the ability to check your work to make sure, hey, you're not lying about something, or you're not giving incorrect information. Why this came up is like coming back to that previous example of this open router, this auto LLM, the fact that it auto selects which LLM is being used is very important, right? To kind of validate, in fact, that, okay, which LLM is actually being used, right? Are you just saying you're using this, or is in fact that's actually what's happening behind the scenes as you do that? And so I want to make sure, like, that's an important thing to kind of call out for everybody in terms of that. And so, if you don't trust me, right, trust the founder of OpenSea and Open Router and whatever, like, he apparently knows what he's talking about, as an example. So any questions from anybody? Wasil, you got a question? He's like, no, not listening to you. Cool. Ross, any questions for you? So we're kind of go through this, or anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I love it because it's especially the chain, right, of density. Like right now I'm going through this, like steps, but then it's based on the previous response. So it's like it could go south really fast.
Yeah.
And answer totally, oh, that's not what I asked. And so I love it. Great topics, great points. Yeah.
Yeah, and chain of density is something we're just for the group here, right? Like from ArcBlock's perspective, we're investing heavily into, and we actually ran a bunch of tests. We had a bunch of engineers run a bunch of tests to validate, in fact, like, hey, rather than having multiple agents, like one agent do something and then the next agent check the work and do something else, we said, hey, like, in fact, can this actually perform at a better level?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, right?
Wow.
As we tested it, as we went through it. And so this is one of those topics where I was, to be honest, a little TBD, like, should we include this? Should we not? But I think it's.
Oh yeah, this is fantastic, actually, because I'm actually manually creating sub-agents. Right? You have your task, go get some news, compile them, bum, 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 bum. Right. And then, but I'm always thinking about costs, right? And so I'm like, wow, yeah, it sounds great theoretically, but is it worth it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And there's a few reference articles on here for anybody who's interested in kind of diving into like chain of density prompting, right? It kind of goes through again. This is actually where I pulled the prompt from, as you kind of go through it. But this is a great example, and I probably like this article, just because I want to say KD nuggets. But this is actually a pretty interesting article. And again, there's a ton of research, and this is chain of density was a concept originally developed by like MIT, Salesforce, and a few other companies came together and basically came up with this way of prompting. So it's got like a kind of academic rigor in the background, but something just to think about, right? Is again, we think about our prompts and maybe not applicable all the time, but something to consider as we think about that. And again, coming back to AIGNE, the prompt is so important, right? As you build within kind of a no code environment, right? Is like really being able to have command of the prompt and be able to use it in a way that really lets you do the things you're trying to do. So.
Hey, Matt, I got a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So like right now, if I'm on ChatGPT, I could get it at like $20 for the month.
Mm-hmm.
And does AIGNE have a way that I can limit how much I spend on it per month, or something like that? Because if I'm using it a bunch, how would I make sure that I don't go over a certain amount, spending wise?
Yeah, man, that's great. Let me show you real quick. Actually, maybe it's right here. So I was actually on this a couple days ago, actually going through this. If you guys can see my screen, so this is actually through AIGNE. This is the AI Studios portion, and within kind of Agent Studio, right? Unlimited projects, unlimited requests, unlimited deployments, private agent publishing, pay as you go. And then you have this one here, right? 10 ABT, right? Which is like 1,000 requests a month. 1,000 requests being, when the way that they're evaluated is like literally it's like 1,000 prompts, right? So you're not being evaluated based on the token consumption. You're being evaluated based on the number of times you put in a prompt request, as you do that. And so that might be one easy way to solve a 12. Because for sure, like I myself like using, I was testing a couple of other platforms like Lovable and V0 and Vercel. Like I quickly, even with the paid accounts, quickly hit my limits. And they're like, oh, you need to pay to upgrade within that. And that's what I was saying is, as I kind of evaluated the solutions, I was like, what I had the realization, I was like, wait, you're telling me Agent's actually cheaper than it is for me to go and subscribe to X, right? And yeah, the feature set is a little bit different, right? Because you're not necessarily going to get exactly the same feature set as you do that. But if the focus being is like, hey, we're focusing on the cost of the AI agent processing information, these plans were great from that. And so as far as like a cost like notification, I would think we can quickly set up like like an email notification, right? To saying, hey, you're approaching your limit. It's kind of like if you've ever worked with like AWS, they have like a free tier limit. So when you get to the end of your free amount per month, they'll send you a notification saying, hey, you're almost at the maximum. And for sure, 12, we could do something similar. Like if that would be helpful for you, that wouldn't be hard to do, just to send a notification on that. Does that kind of answer your question, 12? Or
Yeah, it does. No, it definitely answers my question. I guess I'm just not sure like what you mean when you say agent is less expensive. Like it's hard for me to understand how, because I feel like isn't agent using ChatGPT or to some extent?
Correct. No, you're 100% correct. And it's that I had the exact same reaction and question for our internal team when I kind of started reviewing the numbers, because same, right, where I'm always kind of mindful of the cost, right, as we do something. And that's kind of the benefit of agent, right? As you say, well, hey, in fact, I'm getting less. And part of that has to do with more because you're consuming our internal credits versus OpenAI's credits. ArcBlock has a larger pool of available resources to go and consume, for like, it's probably the most explicit way to say it. And as you kind of look at that, and this is where again, like if you look at, you'll always see with an agent, like how like, okay, this is going to take 10 tokens. Or if you look at the models here, like it'll tell you like the token consumption, the benefit of that agent through the launcher service, right? As you say, well, the credits don't matter, right? What matters is the number of prompts that you're putting in, right? And that was a decision the company made to make it more attractive to consume with that. So maybe you and I can connect, and I can walk you through
Okay.
if that would be helpful too.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. It kind of makes it, I think, a little bit more user friendly as well, right? Like prompts versus tokens. Tokens, what are you talking about? Right? It's a token. Yeah. Somebody coming in and like, I don't know what that is. Well, it's words.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mind telling you guys this, like, as I've been learning to use agent, one of the first questions and tickets I put into our internal team is like, what does this even mean? Like what is 128K credits? Like, but how do I how are tokens? Like, how do I know? Like, am I actually using 128,000 tokens each time, or like, how does I have no idea, right? And so again, that's kind of the premise, is just to, like everything with agent, right? It's really no code, simple, non-technical as you do that. And so
It's food for thought, but it would be nice to kind of like provide some kind of model, like, okay, this is what I pre-programmed, write no code, and running through it on average, this is how much tokens. Well, sorry, this is how much. Well, yeah, it costs internally, right? And that way, you just can start fine tuning, right? And like, you know what? Let me make it a little bit cheaper if I maybe phrase it a little more concise, not be so verbose. Anyways, just idea.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. And I think that was kind of the idea of like what they were trying to do with the about 10 tokens up here in the upper right hand corner, right? But it's a little bit ambiguous to understand, like, wait, is that connected to my prompt or like whatnot? So again, great feedback and great question from that. And that's hopefully what I would come back and strive for is we want to make agent the easiest place to build AI agents, but then B is also the most cost effective at the same time, right? I mean, that's really the premise behind this, is to make it kind of a platform of choice to build AI, if you will. And I think by consolidating that, because one of the other challenges you also have is through AIGNE, you have access to all these different models. Again, as you kind of go through this and say, well, hey, like I instantly have access to hundreds of models, of which I can choose any that I want. It doesn't matter. And in fact, each agent I design can have different models, right, that I'm actually selecting with that. And that's kind of the beauty of that. And that's where, from a pricing standpoint, you can kind of understand where ArcBlock will come and say, actually, we just charge a flat fee and it's 1,000 requests, regardless of what agents you're actually using. It doesn't matter from that perspective. So yeah, if any of you guys have questions, or 12, if you want to dive in, if something doesn't make sense, happy to grab a little bit of time with you. Okay, cool. All right, 1 hour down. Any just to kind of to ask you guys real quick, any pending questions or thoughts, just based on what we just covered? Because it's kind of going through the best practices, just go through some information too quick. No, everybody's sleeping, taking a nap, a little siesta in the afternoon. Okay. Okay, that's cool. Okay, let's keep going then. So this is going to move more into the example section as we kind of do this. And again, with anything that you see in here, everything's written out. You guys all have access to the exact same stuff that I do in terms of how to build the agents, the prompts, the requirements that kind of go with that. And then you also have a link to a preview to actually go in and try it yourself as you do that. And so agent number 1, you guys again heard a lot of talk about ArcBlock in terms of like translation agents, right? Translation capabilities. We now have a really pretty sophisticated translation system in the back end, right? That's really working with PagesKit now. It's working with DiscussKit. It's kind of rolling out anywhere and everywhere, and it's awesome. It actually is my favorite thing at ArcBlock, just between us and this group here, because you can imagine, like as a worldwide company, having the ability to all speak in our native language, but then consume content back from the other person in a way that doesn't require us to hit like translate every time, or misunderstand kind of what you're saying to me or what I'm trying to say to them, has been really powerful. And so this is kind of a basic framework of like how a translation agent actually works. Probably the biggest takeaway I would want folks to have from this one, right, is this is a 2-agent configuration, right? So kind of going back to the best practices that we've actually been talking through. This 2-agent configuration here, let me pull it up here real quick. Let's see here. So this is again a pretty simple example, but what we've got here, and again, if you want to pull up the article like on your screen, feel free to take a look at it. But really, the premise behind it is there's 2 agents, right? Agent number 1, its job is to say, basically take in the text and provide an accurate translation back, based on that processing, right? Again, whatever you want to do, and process it directly back into the end user's native language that they select, right? So Spanish, English, whatever it may be. Agent number 2, in terms of that secondary processing, would be kind of the paraphrasing, right? Where make it more human-like, less mechanical. You're kind of an expert at translating as you actually do this. And so the purpose behind that being is that when you have you take a literal translation and then you paraphrase the translation, you get a more accurate translation back of what actually was requested. So the LLM, what you find, and there's actually a lot of articles on this, right? So when you're doing translation, is if you just have one LLM, it works pretty well, but in fact, it's less accurate than if you actually use two that work together. So in this case, just to go back, in terms of that agent setup here, and we can walk through this kind of step by step, or again, if you've got the article there, you can just take a quick look at it. But within that literal translation, right? First off is the user input, right? Which is the question, right? That's that input. And then part number two here would be the language location, our target language, right? So as I set this up, and you can see the outputs here on the right-hand side, one of the great parts about the user inputs, right, is again, I can, based on what the user is putting in, I can call another agent, I can call my knowledge base, I can also talk to the API if I need to. And then of course the secret, don't ask me about that one, it's too secret. I actually don't know what that is. As you kind of go through that. And then target location, right? That target language, right? These are a bunch of different options you have in terms of the format, right? And language select being one of those that's already kind of built in. But you've got, again, multi-line, image, verify a verifiable credential, language select, right? So again, as you look at that input, there's two ways you can actually do this. One being is you can actually tell the LLM to basically auto select the language based on the user input. So whatever language they come in, they're talking to you in, hey, I want you to translate this level of this text, and then I copy in Chinese text. You can tell the LLM to auto translate, or alternatively, I can actually go in and just have it selected. In terms of doing that, what's important here is just kind of looking again. I wanted to call is the fact that you have options, right? There's no one way is the right way. It's more of again, just aligning to the objectives you're trying to do. As you kind of go through that, and you can see again here through target language, right? Translate directly into the language that was selected through the user input as you kind of go through that. And then agent, one of the great things with agent, right, is you have this generate text stream. The system will always try to find a way to do it for you within the output, both inputs and outputs, right? So if you create a prompt and you come in here and you say, again, I'm gonna take this as an example. So let me go back. I'll show you what I mean by that. So when you create this, and you can see by default, right, I've got question in terms of my inputs. So if I replace that with the text I just created, it'll auto add the input that I just put in there, right? And then again, the output's the same, where if I have something unique that I want to output, and I put that in the prompt itself, it'll auto generate what that output should actually be. So one of those nifty things, right, in terms of just making it a little bit easier to consume. And I don't know if you did know that or didn't know that, but that's something that, again, coming back to the prompting, why the prompting is so important, because if you can prompt well, agent will do the majority of the work for you as you kind of go through that. Let me go back here. Trying to remember which one I was on here. Too many screens. Apologies, guys. That's because that was over here. Is there any questions on this part so far? Kind of makes sense? Okay. So the second, in terms of the entry agent, right? So this is the one that's the UI, it's the front end. The part I want to call it here, right, is in terms of looking at the task description, right? Is you're effectively going back and saying, hey, refer to the original text and the direct translation result, combine those with magazine style, right? And this is really up to you, you as the creator of the agent, to kind of define magazine style, formal style, concise, whatever, right? And then retranslate it again into the target language to make sure the translation is accurate, fluent, and natural, right? So magazine style being kind of the way that we're describing, this is how we want the text to look. So the two things that are happening, one is agent number one creates the literal translation. Agent number two says, okay, let's translate it again, but now, take that translation that was just created, let's make it a little more natural, a little more like magazine style, or a little more concise in terms of doing that. So the agents are working together, right, to create that output. in terms of trying to make it a little bit more accurate. And that's kind of how they're working together in terms of doing that. So, and I would encourage you, again, you've got the doc, like you can build this in about 4 minutes. If you guys have that doc, in terms of doing that. The other college I would also note on the entry agent, and this is something you'll see kind of within these multi-agent configurations, right, is the previous translation. So going back to what I said in terms of like I have my variable here, right, which is previous translation text. And then you can see up here, one thing that's actually happening here is it's calling agent number 1, right, to say, hey, go and get that translation that the first agent actually did, and then use that as part of your processing, right? And that's where this call out up here is actually using previous translations, the input, call the agent, go and get it, and then the format is the output of what you're actually doing. So again, just kind of thinking about that flow, it's a relatively straightforward process, but that is again making sure that your agent is actually getting the information it needs to do that. Okay. Let's actually try real quick, by the way. So I populate with, I have a little bit of text here, and I'll first let's do the debug mode just to see as we kind of go through this. So I got some Chinese stuff. I don't know Chinese, by the way, in case anybody wants to know. Just as a side note. And then if I go ahead and execute it, again, I can see, looking at the details, right? Here's the question, target language is English. And if I actually look in the details, here's the number of tokens I consumed, etc. Literal translation in terms of that. And then here's the text, right, that it actually generates. So that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes. But then if you want to go look, let's actually go look at what's happening on the front end, right? So this is like the actual UI of what we just did. And so got that Chinese. Again, I can pick English. I could pick, let's try Portuguese just for fun. I also don't speak Portuguese. The benefit of the language selector, right, is it automatically does these things for you in terms of doing that. And these things can be done behind the scenes, again, but for demonstration purposes, I wanted to put it all on the front end, right, so everybody could actually see it. So,
Well, that's cool.
pretty straightforward. Again, it's very similar to like what we're doing, right, in terms of those are the discuss kit inputs, right? Like, so if you're chatting with someone, it's effectively working the same way, right? And behind the scenes, right, that's kind of what the system is doing. So,
Very cool.
okay. So that's example number 1. Example number 2. So this one is goes a little bit further, maybe slightly more complex. Again, the premise behind this one is to say, hey, I want to create learning plans for individuals based on kind of their desired goals in terms of doing that. And I want this to be entirely prompt based, right? Where I want my end users to be able to come in and just through natural text, tell me whatever it is that they're actually trying to do. Like, oh, I want to become a software developer. Or I want to become this type of person. And the reality is, like with something like this, though, is you have to give them a little bit of direction. Like, hey, like tell us about your level of expertise. How do you like to learn? However it may be, right? And you can create parameters, and you'll see this in the last example we have, where I can create like boxes where people actually have to put it in, or we just leave it open ended, right, for people to basically put in what it is that they want to do. And so let me pull it up here real quick. See, learning plan agent. So again, I would, if you don't have the doc open, just pop that bad boy open and take a look. And so within this, again, we've got, it's a 3-agent configuration. Within the 3-agent configuration, there's 3 parts, right? Skills assessor. So this is actually the one that's the front end intake, where you're basically, hey, like you're the skill assessor, you're going to receive information about a user, and based on this information, determine their skill level and provide, user experience, self-assessment, et cetera. Like we need a way to somehow like categorize the information that they're actually giving us. And in this case, right, you can see that there's 3 inputs that our agent's using. It's the subject, like what are they interested in, user experience level, like, oh, I'm a beginner, I'm advanced, and then my self-assessment, I'm really good at doing whatever. So you can design that way. So that's agent number 1 as you create that. And then agent number 2, what it actually is going to do then is to say, okay, great. Now you're the learning plan generator. You're going to receive information about the user, right? Their skill level, their goals, the preferred learning style. And then based on this information, right, create a plan that includes very specific resources and activities, be professional in your tone, et cetera. And so you can see again, the recurrent skill level, learning goals, preferred learning style, as they do that. And then you can also incorporate knowledge base into this as well, right? So in some cases, maybe you're connected directly to Udemy or something else. Again, that's up to you, right, in terms of that. And then in this case, kind of going back to the best practices, I'm defining a structured output, right? The learning plan should be structured to include the following things, right? Topics, learning resources, activities, timeline. This one's a little bit softer in terms of some of the output descriptions, but the format being is like, it's actually relatively long, right? As you actually do this. And then consider the user's learning style, right? So we're giving them a little bit of context in terms of that output as we actually do that. And then the third agent, again, is our front end, our orchestrator kind of the whole thing, as you do that. And so, whoops, didn't mean to cheat there. And then in terms of like here, I've got a very basic, if you actually look at this, right, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on, right? It's basically take the input. And then the only thing that's happening in the output, right, is in fact, I'm taking the plan and I'm again calling that learning agent, which is the learning plan generator. So I have to make sure through my process, right, that I actually call that agent to say, okay, great, give me your output so I can go and display it on the screen, in terms of doing that. And that's it. It's again, really relatively straightforward. So it's taking something that is something, from a user standpoint, it's very open-ended, somewhat abstract, and it's open to a lot of interpretation in terms of how people design their learning plans, right? Again, because not everybody's going to communicate the same way. And so as a user session, I'll like, hi, I am Max. I am a wannabe software or however, I am a beginner, and apologies for all the typos here, everybody. Beginner, and have only done marketing for 20 years. I like to learn, see through videos, and do webs. So I'll just leave it at that. Pretty, not a whole lot of detail there. And you can see our agent immediately starts to process, right, and say, okay, great, right? It's great that you're interested. And it's a relatively nice response, right? Like, oh, great. Look at you, Matt. Way to go. Like, I'm really encouraging you to do this, right? Transition from a career to marketing can be a rewarding journey, which I don't know, for me is maybe a little too fluffy, but that's okay, right? We want this interaction typically to be pretty positive. And then you can see here in terms of the output, again, it's going to give you, going back to the structured format, right? Like, here's where you can go and learn information. Here's some books, some practice platforms, community forums, tips. So in this case, if you kind of go back to how I input the text, I never really said like, oh, I've got like 8 weeks, or I want to, by June, I want to do something else. If you provide like a time specific input, right, then the system will actually it'll take a different route and potentially give you like a week to week plan of like, okay, great, I want to learn how to do this by June. Here's your plan in terms of doing that. And in terms of the learning plan generator, again, those inputs, just to look at that, right? Again, the tokens, et cetera. So makes sense. Okay. Questions? Anybody? You guys all built your learning plan generator on the side?
Got it.
Okay. I think the 12, like as an example, like this would be something in terms of like building a curriculum in terms of like, hey, how to learn how to build beats, right? I can teach Matt who, as his wife says, is somewhat non-rhythmic. How can you help me write better music, right? As an example, right? Or again, these because learning plans can be applied to all sorts of different categories, right? It could be, you could very easily apply this to like a health plan. It could be a learning plan. It could be something else, right? And the layout and the structure is the same, right? Just the inputs and the outputs change, based on that. But again, you have the benefit of the LLMs where they're smart enough to do these things, as you try that. So pretty easy, pretty powerful. And to give you guys a comparison, right? And Ross, maybe you can talk about your own experiences building agents. Like, is it, I don't know, do you use like LangChain, or what are you using for like some of your other?
Yeah. So I just started actually about 3 weeks ago and kind of caught up really quickly. And so I'm using actually, I like to soak everything. So I just got tons of books, but actually I'm going to be using LangChain. And so right now I'm using frameworks. And but I've also experimented with just downloading, for example, llamas, just some LLMs, for me to get my hands dirty. But yeah, I'm actually creating an API, right? That actually is LLM agnostic, which is amazing. I mean, literally every point that you mentioned is like right on line with what I'm doing, and like, man, this is exciting because like you've already provided like a framework, a lot of work already. So it's like, wow, very impressive.
Yeah.
How quickly somebody can actually come in and start doing this. Yeah, so yeah, I'm using like one of the frameworks is Hurist. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Hurist. But yeah, OpenAI, a couple of different LLMs. Trying to get the fit for this niche very right, because this is specifically for cryptocurrency. So finance, trading. So I'm trying to limit my agent to be domain specific. I asked it, who is Donald Trump, and it answered it. I'm like, dang it, don't answer.
Right. It's funny. No, that's great. And thanks for sharing. That's cool. It's, I think one of the things you quickly find, and I think for me, right, we haven't been with ArcBlock for a while, right? It's like we just kind of make assumptions like, oh, this stuff's so easy, and you don't really realize like if you go a different direction, right, it's actually quite complex to build agents, and there's a lot of things that actually go into this, and I think that's the power and the benefit, and more importantly, also, is the team is open to getting feedback of like, hey, if you want something, to 12's question earlier, back into like a notification in terms of like credit consumption as an example. More often than not, you can get those things. And so, yeah, it's cool. It's, thanks for sharing with that. In terms of, I was going to pull this up again real quick, going back to your question. I'll come back to it. I was going to show you the knowledge, the DIF knowledge base. I was going to show you that in terms of not responding, it just kind of blows up on itself. I had this project here real quick. I don't know if the folks on this call, if you guys want to go and actually take a crack at trying to build one of these, while we're on here. Again, it's all laid out. I wanted to take a few minutes just to give everybody a chance to try it. This particular agent, this specific agent, is effectively like a meeting summarizer, an action item agent. And what that actually means, right, is like we've all seen, like if you use Zoom or use anything else, like, oh, here, we'll create a transcript in our AI. We'll call out the salient points from the meeting. This is basically the same thing, right? Where you can take a transcript from a meeting and take it, summarize it. Well, first off, is take it, clean it, summarize it, and then provide kind of the relevant points and action items back to people who have tasks or things that they need to do based on the meeting. So that's what this is. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up because I don't think anybody wants to do any work. You guys are all eating lunch and doing other things. What's the other things? Cool. All right, real quick. So this is this is actually very similar to the ones we were just talking about earlier, right? But in terms of like the 3-agent concept, meeting summarizer, got a processor, I've got a summarizer, an extractor, and then I've got my front end UI, right? Which is the one. This one is a little bit different because there's one additional parameter that we had to add to it to get it to display the information in the way that we actually want. And so that was a little bit unique, where I actually have within the agent itself, where it's actually using a parameter, which is the raw transcript. And again, that's using to create our output. So, and it kind of walks through that in the doc. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But just real quick, again, if you kind of go through this, again, if you think about the workflow or the sequence of events, right, that our agents are doing, right, it's like, hey, you're a processor, your job is to go and clean and format the raw transcript. So let me see if I have I'll show you guys an example of what that transcript actually looks like. Because typically when you get like a transcript from like Zoom or something else, you're going to have like timestamps, and then you have like, oh, Ross was talking, then Matt was talking, and then 12 was talking. And there's a bunch of typos, just because, again, the system's trying to figure out like, the transcript service doesn't necessarily try to like clean it up as you actually do that. And so we want to go say, hey, go clean it up, remove the typos, fix the grammar errors, format the text in a way that our summarizer agent can actually come and consume. Actually, as you actually go ahead and do that. And then in terms of that agent here itself, you guys can actually see it goes through that process of like, okay, great. As the summarizer, right, here's your tasks. And again, going back to that specific roles, defining the things that you need to actually go and do, right? So now that we've got the text, it's been cleaned up, create a summary for us, and then create those action items in terms of this, creating this format, right? Which is based on person, task, and deadline, if it's actually mentioned. Actually, as you do that, right? And then prepare it as you go through that. And lastly, again, it's kind of the output, right? And you can see here, there's a big block of text, right, that I had put in here before. I'll just do it for fun. All right. Then here, so you can see within the JSON file, right? Again, it's going to have the data, and I can deploy it. But I'll let everybody walk through that. If you guys want to take a few minutes to do that, or we can just keep going. ROS 12 preferences, just keep going.
Just keep going for me, myself. Yeah. But actually that previous, the summarizer actually is right in line actually with one of my projects. So it's like, man, this is awesome. This is great.
Awesome. Okay. So real quick, the two last things I wanted to cover here for I think the rest of the session here, there's two parts. One is, there's a references section here in the deck. I actually have gotten a range of questions, and I'm just going to mention this real quick in the appendix. I would encourage you all just to take a look in your own time. But it kind of goes through in terms of like inputs, processing, and outputs. What do these different things actually mean? I've had a few folks ask me, basically for definitions, right? So they understand what each one actually does as you kind of go through that. So that's part one. Part two being is like really thinking about what's next in terms of where we're going. And so with Agent, there's a ton of really great things happening. But I think one of the, again, just kind of that one area of focus here for the folks on this call and also for ArcBlock, right, is so-called MCP, right? Model Context Protocol. As we kind of go through that. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time. There's a couple of articles already up on the blog related to introducing Model Context Protocol. One is kind of we'll call it a non-technical version, what I call the fresh take, right, which is the MCP for non-technical builders. And then the second part is introducing Model Context Protocol under the thought processes of agent, like what does it actually mean? And so really, you can see here in the diagram, really what MCP is all about is basically giving agents superpowers, right? And giving these AI systems the ability in a safe and trusted way to go and access data, systems, services that are outside of our ecosystem, right? Some of the really obvious examples would be like Stripe, for example, right? Or another AI or another developer platform. So you could say, hey, like all of a sudden Agent can now work with Windfall, right? Or it can work with Lovable or work with something else. So it's really powerful in terms of the capabilities that's adding on. And MCP is a kind of an exploding technology, right? Where it's already in the time that I think you guys, somebody correct me, right? I think it launched at the end of November, right? But it's going gangbusters in terms of building them out. So that's an area where ArcBlock is really we're investing into it, and we're going to be a thought leader in that space as we go forward and make sure Agent is front and center, kind of in this new marketplace that's actually happening. And you'll see there'll be some new site content that we're going to put on there. We definitely want everybody to get involved, and then more importantly, as these things come online, you're going to see them available within the Agent ecosystem to quickly get to. And then lastly, real quick here, just to touch on, if you haven't already, make sure to check out the live projects and academy courses that Robert did before, if you haven't. These are great walkthroughs to go through, and Robert does a great job of walking us through, like, building a project out through kind of multiple courses where you can see it kind of grow over time, and then also just different features and functionality that he goes through in terms of Agent and its capabilities. So those are super helpful if you haven't had the opportunity to go through those, but I would encourage everybody to look at those. So, and outside of that, that's it. We covered a ton of content in a very short amount of time. Any pending questions that I can answer for you, or I can follow up on the team, follow up with our team on? Yeah, you bet. And I'll get this uploaded. I'll actually share this back out again. I would encourage you, anybody that has any very specific questions, feel free to just grab me, and I'm happy to connect directly.
And thank you. This is awesome. We're super helpful, because it's like, oh my goodness, you really like, you put a lot of work into this, and it's like, oh my gosh, out of these 3 weeks, you condensed it into 2 hours. Super important topics that yeah, they're at the forefront, and yeah, we're tackling right now.
Amazing. All right, guys. Well, thanks for jumping on.